New study came out about the Vital Farms pasture-raised eggs. What does this mean? So when you look at this study, essentially what we're looking at is the fatty acid profiles of factory farmed eggs, Vital Farms eggs, and actual pasture-raised eggs where the chickens were eating what they should be eating outside. So what's happening here? What's happening here is that companies do the bare minimum to get a certain certification, to get the pasture raised label, while not actually meeting any good standards. And you can see based on these numbers of fatty acids that the fatty acids of the Vital Farms eggs are so similar to the factory farm eggs, they're basically no different. And what are these fatty acids? Fatty acids are just the types of fats that are in the egg. This makes a huge difference for how healthy something like an egg, beef, dairy, all these products, when they have a good fatty acid profile from being fed a natural diet, are healthy. When they're factory farmed, fed corn and soy, they develop a bad fatty acid profile. Saturated fats are fatty acids, unsaturated fats, omega-6, omega-3. You might have heard of these distinctions before. There's a lot of nuance here, but simply put, you don't want linoleic acid in these high amounts as a result of the chickens being fed corn, soy, other grains. Chickens should be eating 70% bugs and worms, 20% to 30% forage, and at most 10% organic grains, although they don't even need any of those. So when you look at these eggs, what you're seeing is that pasture-raised eggs from Vital Farms, the chickens are being kept outside the minimum amount they need to be. These companies that Vital Farms contracts with are doing the bare minimum and whatever they can to get that certification and not really feeding the chickens good food. What that would come from is having high quality regenerative soil that's full of bugs and worms and having the chickens rotationally graze that so it has time to regenerate, so that the poop and the disturbance from the chickens actually builds the soil. Worms, bugs, and healthy forage that gets disturbed and grows back from the fertilizer from the chickens. That's a regenerative, productive system. Now, when you look at the pasture-raised eggs from Vital Farms, they're probably just out on a mostly dirt lot with dead, barren soil, and they're being fed a bunch of corn and soy. And that's evident. It's very obvious when you look at these numbers that it's not even a gray area. These chickens are being fed absolutely terribly. So that's what this shows, and there are some good brands in the grocery store, but it's really hard to tell. If you want to be getting good eggs, don't just say, oh, these Vital Farms eggs are probably good. Yes, in reality, the chickens are probably happier. They're less abused than most factory farm chickens. But if you want to be getting actual really good eggs, you need to have a lot higher standards than that. And this is why it's so important to go to local farms to really investigate where the food comes from and not just go off of some certification in the grocery store. That's why I like building food forests, because when you grow your own food, you can see that this fruit actually has no chemicals on it versus some organic fruit that just doesn't use the worst chemicals. They don't use the top 10 worst pesticides and they can call it organic. Basically, the standards for organic have been going down for 30 years. These terms like pasture-raised, now we know pasture-raised eggs basically means nothing. I would look for corn and soy-free feed. That's the best you can ever find in the grocery store as far as eggs. But really, then they could be being fed some other non-organic grains. You would want something where they say, yeah, these chickens get 80+% of their diet, 90+% ideally, from forage, from bugs and various grasses that the chickens forage themselves. We know that these chickens only eat 10% of organic grains as supplemental feed, and that's it. They don't need to be getting a bunch of micronutrients. Think about it. This supplemental feed is corn and often a bunch of micronutrient, artificial, extremely cheap chemical additive nutrient additives. They don't need that. Chickens don't need that. They just need bugs, worms, and some grasses. Maybe a little bit of grains that they find along the way. They can forage those grains, though. We don't need to be feeding them corn. So if you want really good eggs, find a farmer that does that, not a farmer that does it pasture-raised. Corn and soy-free is good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's actually good. But yeah, basically that's what this study is showing. This is something that we've known, but it just really outlines how completely nonsense this label being pasture-raised from Vital Farms is. This company has been sued in the past for failing to meet standards, so they might not even necessarily be meeting those standards. They're doing the bare minimum to get away, and then sometimes they dip below that bare minimum and get in trouble. They're just doing the least they can to get those profit margins and just to pump those chickens full of corn and soy. So basically that's what this study means, and that's the video.